One thing that's very common in web pages is that the content is centered in the browser. And so let's now learn how to do that. So up until this point, our page basically occupies the entire browser width, right? So even if we stretch this all the way out here, you see that basically the page occupies everything here. Except of course for this little bit of padding that we added to the side. Now, usually that's not really what we want. So what we're looking for is basically this, where we have the content here in the center, and then when the page becomes smaller, then of course it stays in the center like this, right? And so let's now try to implement that. Again, because this is very, very common to see in web pages. So how can we do that? Well, let's try to think about it. So if we want to center everything, so the entire content of the page, all of this here inside of the body, basically, it means that first of all, we need to have everything inside of one box, right? So that we can then basically center that box inside the browser, so inside the viewport. So basically all of this here will be in one box. And so as I showed you before, this box will then be centered here in the browser. Okay, so let's do that. And here, I will again use a simple div for that. So basically a box that does not have any meaning. So this is really just for the purpose of this layout. And so I will just call it a container. So a generic div with a class of container. But of course it could have any other name as well. This is just something that I like to use. So let's cut this here. And then we need to put it right before the closing tag of the body so that it really contains every single element on the page. So right here. Now for now, visually that will not really change, of course, but now we can do some changes by styling it. So main layout, let's do that right here. Container. Okay. So if we want to center a box in the browser, then that box, of course, needs to have a different width than the browser window. Otherwise, there's not really anything to center, right? And so let's give it a width. So we haven't still used that. So the width and the height properties. And so this is a new thing. So let's experiment with different width here. And let's just start with 1400 pixels. Okay. And I need to manually reload. And there you go. Well, that's actually too big. Let's start with, well, let's start actually with just 1000 pixels. All right. So here we have our page. And you know what I'm going to do next. I will give it a background color. Let's use this one called orange red that I like. It's a bit easier on the eyes. Okay. And so this is our container now. So we gave it a width, but now this box here basically needs to be centered inside of this viewport. So inside of the browser, right? So how could we do that? Well, there's actually multiple ways. So if you remember the few previous lectures, we could actually use Flexbox in order to center this container on the page, right? We could also use CSS Grid, but we are going to use something that's even simpler here. So that's actually one of the oldest CSS tricks. And we are going to use an automatic margin, basically. So the trick is that the margin on the right needs to be the same as on the left, and they need to be automatically calculated. So margin left needs to be auto, and margin right needs to be auto as well. And so this is also what we did before with Flexbox somewhere. Yeah, right here. So we basically allowed the browser to automatically calculate this margin here in order to push the buttons to the side. And here now we will, the browser automatically figure out the margins on the left and on the right side. And so since these two margins will be the same on the left and on the right side, it means that the page will be centered. So when I save this now, this is what we see. So we have the container, and so we see here these two margins, and they are exactly the same on both sides. Great, and now, here we go. So the page stays nicely centered because as we change the browser size, it will automatically recalculate the margins. And of course, it's going to look a bit prettier without the color, but first I actually need to show you something else, which is what happens once we go beyond the 1000 pixel threshold. So you see that now at some point, the page no longer fits on the screen. And so the problem is that the page is now less than 100 pixels wide, which is the width that we gave to this container. So as we start getting smaller, it starts to look really bad, right? So you never see anything like this on a real page. So we need to fix that, of course, because imagine the user is even like on a phone. So that would be a terrible experience, right? So instead of using width, we can actually use something better, something a bit more modern, and that is called max width. So let's see, and that's fixed. So what max width does is that whenever there is enough space to display the 1000 pixels, then the element will get that width. So if there is enough space, but if not, well, then the element will simply take the width that is available. And so that's why it's called max width. It will never have more than 1000 pixels, but if necessary, it can be less than that. And when we hover over here, we can actually see up here, right, there we can see the dimensions, that now it has a width of 790 pixels. And so it keeps nicely adapting there to the browser. Now, for example, let's see, we have 980, so we should be almost there. So now we have 1000, and we can already see some margins there. And so from now on, as we keep increasing this, it stays at the 1000 pixels. But again, if we stay way below, then it will adapt and will become smaller. So that's ideal, and that's exactly what we are looking for. Now here we can just improve the syntax a little bit and do it all in one line. So usually what you will see is margin 0 and auto. Because remember that this shorthand here means that top and bottom are 0 and left and right are auto, which is just what we have here. So we can write this in one less line of code, still looks the same, and then finally get rid of that. Okay, now 1000 pixels is a little bit too small. Let's maybe make it 1500 pixels. And now we cannot really see that because our screen, or my screen here, is not really wide enough. Oh, actually, so it's just at 1600, you can see that up there in the corner, right? And so yeah, now we start seeing that behavior. Right? And let's actually change the padding a little bit. So I want actually some more padding here on this side than on the top and bottom. So let's change that. Also increase this one here a little bit. So top and bottom 48 pixels and on the sides 64 pixels. So this makes it look a little bit nicer overall. And yeah. So now again, it is centered here. Now, if you don't have enough space on your screen, there is a very nice trick. So this is a feature that most browsers have, and of course Google Chrome as well, which is if you click this icon here, this device toolbar, then you get like a smaller view of the screen where you can then manipulate the width like this. So all you need to do is to set it here, the dimensions to responsive, and you could also choose these different like mobile devices and phones, which we will do a bit later. But for now, choose responsive, because then we can change it manually here. And then you can set the zoom to something like 50% or so. And so now we can make it really big. So you see that the width now is like 2300, but even within a smaller browser screen. And so this is exactly the behavior that I explained before. Beautiful. Let's just go back here And I wanted to do one small final thing here, since we are talking about dimensions in this video, which is to also give this image here dimensions. So we did this already in our HTML. So right here. So using these attributes here, but it's even better doing it also in CSS. So sometimes we might not even know the height or the width of an image beforehand. And so then it's good to know how to do it in CSS, which usually we do most of the time, actually, just in CSS. So what we want to style, just going back here, is this image, right? So we need to select it. And now you will learn even something new again. So instead of adding now a class here, I will actually not do that and instead select the image that is inside the logo. So we can easily do that in CSS with the so-called descendant selector. So let me show you what I mean. So instead of selecting all the images like this, like I would usually do, we can do it differently. Again, using the descendant selector by writing logo, then this space here, and then image. And so this will only select the images that are inside of an element with the class of logo. Okay. Now in this case, it doesn't make much difference because this is the only image that we have here, but it's very, very important to know the selector, and we also need to do it a little bit later. Okay, so here let's again specify the width, 68 pixels, and the height actually would be automatically calculated, but yeah, why not specify it as well? So then you know that these two properties here exist as well, height and width. And this will not change anything on the page because it already was like that before, but now it's even more complete.